So, when I was in college, I went through this period where I started lying. Now, I understand that generally speaking, that period is when your child is between 3 and 4, and they realize that they can state something that is not true, and they hope they'll get out of trouble that way. But it was a more genuine sort of thing. I wasn't wanting to lie on purpose, but I got into this situation where people would ask me to do things, and I would make a mental note to do them. Some of you are already laughing because you can see where this is going. So, after making a mental note to do it and taking responsibility, a week later, or 2 weeks later, or 3 weeks later, the person would say, "So, did you get that taken care of?" And I would say to myself, well, when I get back to my dorm room, I can call the person in question right away and take care of it right away, so I'll say yes, because I'm going to take care of it in a minute. Now, y'all can imagine how that turned out with me making a mental note and then taking care of it. And this really got me into trouble. The worst thing that happened from it is that I was working with Campus, not working, I was a student serving with Campus Crusade for Christ on my campus. And one of the things that we try to do every year is we do a survey, basically as the freshmen come in, to identify how many of them are already involved in church and might be open to learning more about serving Christ. Well, it was my job to arrange with the Interfaith Council and with the leadership of the school permission to do the survey. Let's just say that the final result was our leader and a couple of the students standing in front of the dining hall taking surveys, and the lady in charge of the Interfaith Council coming down on them, yelling at them for never getting permission to do it, and talking about how it was a horrible thing they were doing it, and I walked up, not even having remembered that I was supposed to be there helping with the surveys, in the middle of it. Now, I would love to be able to tell you this was the last time that happened, but actually, I had promised to go to the zoo with a group of friends and managed to not go about a year after that. So, I would end up in this situation lying, not meaning to, but I did. And the lies would trip me up, hurt the people that I loved, and diminish my relationships. Now, that's my particular story, but we all have stories where we deal with a temptation. We all have things in our life, those times when we are tempted to lie, tempted to shield the truth, or to modify it, or tell what we call a little white lie to somebody else to save their feelings, or we tell ourselves we're doing that, but what we really are doing is saving ourselves a little bit of embarrassment, saving ourselves a little bit of frustration as we deal with them. That we've all been in situations not only where we do that, but where we get a little bit careless with the truth. There's another time when we tend to get careless with the truth is when we're angry. And somehow what the person has done that is actually wrong that they really did was about this big, but because we're mad it's about this big, that sometimes when we get into those arguments and we're not quite sure what to say, we go ahead and say that which will be hurtful as opposed to necessarily that which will be true or relevant to the discussion. And we find ourselves in these situations where our anger, where our lying, where our lives get tied up in going the wrong direction. And it seems as if we almost stumble or trip or fall into it. It's not generally that we deliberately choose and plan to do these things that are not right. And this has to do in the beginning with where we started last week. You see, this week as we're in chapter 4 of the book of Ephesians, starting in verse 25, the very first word is therefore. Now, I'm not going to make the obvious joke because I've heard it too many times, but basically speaking, what Paul is doing is he's saying that what I say from this point forward is directly related to what came before it. Now, for those of you who remember, last week we were talking about this idea of taking off our old nature and putting on our new nature. Of taking off our old assumptions about spirituality, about God, about moral goodness, and putting on what God's Word, the Bible, actually says about who God is and how we ought to behave and what it means to follow Him, what it means to be righteous. And what Paul is doing here is he said, last week we talked about how he said it was important that we do that, and we gave some ideas for what was involved in taking off the old and putting on the new. Well, here Paul is fleshing that out, and he gives us 4 specific things that he says are always a part of putting on that new life. That new life in Christ is going to be distinguished, is going to be shown, is going to be lived out in these 4 particular things. And so this is what he says. He says, therefore, laying aside falsehood, speak truth, each one of you, with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Not speaking the truth is complicated. Lying is always more complicated than telling the truth. Lying is like getting caught in a spider web. It's like somebody shoots you with a spider web, and the more you try to cover and fix and make it look like you didn't lie when you were lying, the more trapped you get in the web. The more you struggle, the more you flail around, the more sticky parts of the spider web get stuck on you and immobilize you. And it's that way with our lives, that when we lie to people, we've got to remember the lie that we told. We've got to modify our action to fit the lies that we laid out there. And the thing about it is that one lie almost always leads to more. That one lie is almost never enough. That when we start there, we've got to add another one over here, and another one over there, and get a friend over here to cover for us about our lie, and our other friend over here to cover for us about the lie, to cover the lie with the friend, and on and on and on. And so what Paul is doing, he says, look, don't do that. Tell the truth to the people around you. And the reason he gives for that, he says that you tell the truth because we are members of one another. And the word there that talks about members is talking about this idea of being part of the same body. That we are not divisible, that we are not separate, that we are not our own individual human beings out there making our own way, but there's a reality of the fact there's a part of the family of humanity. We are related to one another. And we cannot do harm. We cannot lie to this other person as if it's going to have no effect on us. That because we are related to each other, because we are connected to each other, my lie to them that does damage to them will do damage to me. It will rebound upon me because we have this bond between us. And when Paul talks about this bond between us, he talks specifically as well about this bond between people who believe. This bond between people who are trying to follow Jesus. And what that bond is, truly, is the message of the gospel. This idea that all of us, each one of us, left to our own devices, God wanted us to be close to Him. He wanted us to feel His love in our lives, but we individually have run away from Him. We've known what He wants us to do, and we've said, no, I don't want to do what you want me to, or we've understood what He considers to be wrong and tells us not to do it, and said, you know what, I got a better idea, I'm going to do it anyway. And that running away from God creates a separation between us and God. And that separation is the reason that we don't feel God's love for us in our life. That separation is the reason that we don't, day by day, feel wrapped up and around by that relationship with God. And if that separation continues on after our death, it's a permanent separation from God forever, that we would have chosen to be away from Him. But that was not okay with God. And so what He did is He sent His only Son, Jesus, to come and to live the life we should have lived and die the death we should have died. To live the life we should have lived in terms of living perfectly before God and always obeying Him, always doing what He wished, and earning this righteousness, this togetherness with God. And then to die the death that He did for our sake. That what He did is He took all the punishment that we deserve for running away from God. He took all of the wrongdoing that we've done upon Himself. So that that separation can be erased, not by our good deeds, not by getting a positive karma balance, walking bit by bit, but that distance, that separation can be erased by His forgiveness, by His sacrifice on our behalf, so that we can be near to God. In order that all we need to do to be a part of God's family, all we need to do to have that intimacy, that closeness with God, is to put our trust not in our own actions, not in our own goodness, not in our own power or strength, but in the forgiveness that Jesus offers. That when we trust Him, He proves Himself worthy of that trust and brings us near to God. That's what he does. He gives us his forgiveness so that there's nothing God holds against us. So that when we die, we will go to heaven. And when we live here and now, we will be able to have that close relationship where we sense God's love and his strength in our lives. That's what he does. And that's part of what draws us together and part of the reason that when we do lie, when we do choose to disobey what Paul's talking about here, that we cause damage to ourselves and not just to others. So the first thing that Paul says about living this new life is to not lie, to tell the truth. The second thing that he talks about here is he goes on and he says, be angry, yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. Now, one of the things I love about this passage is that he says, be angry. He understands, God knows that sometimes we're going to be angry. We are, and that's an emotional response to a situation. And that anger, that frustration, that aggravation that comes upon us, that is not sin. That sense of this is really messed up and I'm really grumpy about it, or that is not sin. He says to be angry and to sin not. When I think about anger, I think about horseflies. Because you're out there and you're mowing the lawn, and you're mowing the lawn or you're trimming the lawn, and the thing starts going zoom, 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 and you look like a nut job because you're mowing going Curly back in the Three Stooges with the thing. And you're waiting for the dang thing to land just long enough to kill it. But that never seems to happen. And anger is like that. Because we get mad, and then we're like, okay, I'm calmed down, I'm not angry about that anymore, I'm not frustrated, and then something comes in our mind, and we're all mad again, and frustrated and grumping, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be the person we're angry with that did something. It can be something we saw on television. It can be another thought that pops into our head about another way that what this person has thought has made us mad because it's her. And it just keeps coming back. And it never goes away. It's like that horsefly buzzing back at us and buzzing back at us. And what Paul says is he doesn't say, you're angry. You're in trouble now. You better not be angry. That's not a good thing. You should get rid of that anger. Stomp it out. He says, no, in your anger, do not sin. And it brings to my mind a couple of different examples from the Bible, a couple of different times where things happen. One, Jesus is out with his disciples, and he's going through Samaria. And as he's going through Samaria, they're getting tired, they've been on the road for a while, they come up to a town and think, okay, we're going to go spend the night in the town. We're going to go and get dinner and find a place to sleep and rest, and it'll be good. And they go into town, and at the city gate, they're met by the city elders. And the city elders go, we don't want your kind in here, you stinking Jews, you stay out. Now, they've got reason to be aggravated. After all, Jesus and his disciples are actually going through Samaria instead of going around it like all the other Jewish people of their time did. After all, Jesus was the one who on a previous trip that talked to a Samaritan woman at the well, and the whole town ended up believing in him. That these guys are ready to spend their money in this town and increase the financial base of what's going on. They've got every reason to be angry and frustrated, to be grumping about how these poor people won't let them into their town. But then James and John, two of Christ's closest disciples, two of the three people that when Jesus has only a few people coming in around him that he brings with him, they come to Jesus and they go, you know what? You want us to call down fire from heaven and destroy this town? Now, the first thing I'm thinking is Jesus looked at it and went, really? Really? You're going to call down fire from heaven? I would pay to see that. That would be funny. But that they took that step further and decided that in their anger, it wasn't enough to be frustrated. It wasn't enough to complain a little bit. It wasn't enough to be angry about what went on. They were going to get revenge. They were going to burn that town to the ground with power they really didn't have. I think about David, the great king of ancient Israel. And during the time before he was king, as he was out there in the wilderness, he got into this situation where David and his men were in a particular area. And there was a very rich man by the name of Nabal. Now, Nabal had so many flocks of goats and of sheep that he had to send them out away from his home place to pasture. Now, the problem about that is in that time period when people would do that, they would get a lot of what the modern retail stores call shrinkage. Because bandits would come and attack and steal some of the sheep and goats. Because brigands would come through and take that, because the shepherds were sometimes less than completely trustworthy, and perhaps a few of the animals might get eaten out there in the field, and on and on. And what David had done is, while he was in the area, he made it so that there was no shrinkage for Nabal's flocks. In fact, the shepherds say that David's men were like a wall between them and the world. And no bandits, no brigands, no thieves had any ability to come in and take him. Now, at the end of the year, when it came time for shearing the sheep and throwing the party and having a great big time, David sent a few of his young men down to Nabal's farm and said, we've been helping you out for the year. Maybe you could let a little bit of the party spill over into our camp and give us a little bit of stuff. And Nabal, who according to the scripture was basically stone drunk at the time. People should read your Bible. It's funny the stuff you find in there. But Nabal's stone drunk, and he tells David's men, I don't know who you are. A lot of people are breaking away from their masters right now. He's alluding to the fact that Saul's still king and is hunting David, who used to be his servant. A lot of people are breaking away from their masters right now. I don't owe this guy anything. And so David's men come back to him. And he's got every reason to be angry. He has served this man without pay for months. His people have been what protected his assets. He's the reason this party is as big as it is, because Nabal didn't lose anything all summer. But it's not enough for David to be angry. And so he gets his men together, and he says, we're all going to swear an oath that we're going to kill Nabal and every male child in the area, and we're going to wipe him out completely. And he takes that extra step, and he takes his anger, which was justified and appropriate, and there was nothing wrong with it, and he moves over into sin by deciding to take that revenge. What God is telling us here is that in our anger, when we're angry, it's okay that we're angry, but that we are on a danger point when we are. And we need to be extra careful, extra vigilant, extra wise about watching where that line is and being certain that our anger doesn't walk over into sin. That we don't move from appropriately being frustrated with a situation into wanting to get something back or take revenge for what made us angry in the first place. And then Paul goes on, and the next thing he talks about, he says, all right, and do not give the devil an opportunity. I've got to find it. Yeah, and do not give the devil an opportunity. And the word opportunity there is kind of different, because what it is the particular word, you'll sometimes see it translated, and do not give the devil a place. And it's the same word that's talking about the idea of a place, the idea of a place in society, a place at the table, an opportunity to influence events. And what Paul is saying is that we have this tendency to look at God and say, okay, how righteous do I have to be? What's the minimum line? What's the lowest level at which I'm good enough, but I don't have to give up too much of what I would prefer? Or as we're talking about this idea of taking off the old person and putting on the new person, that idea of how much of the old person can I keep to throw away just enough? And what Paul is saying here is he's saying, look, we are giving the devil a place to work in our life. A spot, a beachhead, something inside of our life. And whatever we hold on to, whether it be our lying, whether it be our anger, whether it be what we're going to talk about next, or anything else. And this is kind of where Paul's covered his bases and saying anything else. He's not going to list every single way that we can hold on to our old way of life, but he's saying that any way that we do so, any piece or part of it, what we're doing is we're saying, God, I'm not going to give you this part of my life. I'm going to reserve a spot. And what we're doing is we're reserving a room in our life and in our heart for the devil to keep on influencing us and keep leading us down the old ways of thought that led us into sin. Then he goes on, and this last part, he says, and he who steals must steal no longer, but rather he must labor, performing with his own hands what is good, so that he will have something to share with one who has in need. Now, he who steals must steal no longer. And it's kind of funny, because we got the whole kleptomaniac thing, and it's basically, he says, the klepto needs to quit klepting. which is kind of funny. But what he's talking about there, it's easy for us to go, well, I didn't steal, I didn't hold up a bank, I didn't run in and grab all of I could, I don't go and shoplift, and so on. But the idea of stealing goes to more than that. It's not just this concept of whether or not we held somebody at gunpoint in a retail store. It's this idea of us having at work a way that we're expected to perform, and then deliberately doing significantly less than we're supposed to and trying to get away with it. That's also a form of stealing. Not being completely truthful on the tax forms that we fill out, that's a way of cheating. Cutting corners and not letting people know that we're cutting the corners that we're cutting, that's a way of stealing. That all of these things are also stealing, because the issue is not how big it is, how much it is, or whether or not we get caught. The issue is that in our heart, we know we are taking from someone what belongs to them, what we ought to be giving them, what ought to be theirs. And that stealing, that thievery, is what God tells us we have to not do. Now, as we look at this, as we look at this concept, and I think about this, I think about it in terms of stealing. It's more like, before we've had the horse flag going around, or this concept of when we talked about being caught in a spider web as we're caught in our lives. This is more like lead poisoning. Lead poisoning in an old building, then it builds up over time. It's not that a child or a person gets exposed to lead and immediately they go with the brain damage and all the terrible stuff that happens. It takes time. And in a lot of ways, this idea of stealing, or the way that we let it into our lives, it's not something that's immediate or obvious or bold or jumps up in our face. It becomes bit by bit, day by day, an attitude in our hearts that what belongs to someone else, it's okay if I take it for myself. That what belongs to someone else, it's okay if I run off with bits and pieces of it. That it deadens our heart day by day, piece by piece, bit by bit, removing the respect that belongs there for other people. And removing the respect for doing things the way that we say we do. And instead pulling back away from it. Now this particular passage, I want to let you know, does have a dispute in it. Does have a place where in the original Greek there's a question about what it means. I'm going to give you the extent of the question because it really affects everything. Because it's whether he says you should do something with his hands to have for the poor, for those in need, or he should do something with his own hands to have something for those in need. Now, y'all see what a huge difference that is, right? That's why we can't take the Bible seriously, because it's got these terrible differences in it, right? All right, help me out here, y'all. This is the kind of thing, and this is going to be this long, this is the kind of thing that people who want to say that the Bible isn't really true or the Bible isn't really accurate, this is the kind of a difference they latch on and say, oh, it's a huge difference and we don't really know. And most of them aren't even that bad. So that's my little this much. If you really want to talk about it sometime we can, but I wanted to make you aware that there was a difference in the passage. What Paul is doing here is he says that these four things, the lying, the anger, the holding on to a part of your old life and giving the devil a place in your life, and then finally this last bit about stealing, the issue with all of them is that they are the way of holding on to our old life when God has told us to live a new life. God has called us to live a new way. And all four of them are the situation where something that seems very small, that seems like no big deal, that seems like it's nothing that we should be all that worried about, comes creeping back into our life on tiptoe. Comes creeping back in just in a little way. And we endure it, and we let it go. And we forget that what we're doing is we're giving the devil a foothold. This is what I want to ask you to do this week. First of all, I want you to pick one. Okay? So right now in the pew, I want you to pick one. Lying, stealing, getting angry, or other. And if you pick other, you don't have to tell me what it is, but you have to tell God what it is right now in the pew. Pick one of them. And then all week long, as you find yourself starting to give into that, I want you to do a little mental exercise with me. So everybody close your eyes. I want you to imagine that you're on the beach at Normandy. And if you've never been to Normandy, like I never have, you can imagine Virginia Beach if you want to. But imagine you're there on the beach, and imagine that you see the devil coming up out of the water with a weapon in his hand. Now, for those of you who are dealing with anger, he's got a horsefly shooter, okay? For those of you who are talking about lies, he's got someone that shoots webs, etc. You get the point. You can make him look any way you want. If you want him to be Robert De Niro in a black suit, that's fine. If you want him to be, the horns and everything else. And imagine for a moment, look at him, see him coming out of there, and it's up to you to turn it back, to not give him that foothold, that beachfront property, that place from which to attack your life. Okay, y'all can open your eyes. Because I've already worked hard to put you to sleep, but I don't want to go the rest of the way and finish out. Each time, as you are tempted to give into that one thing you picked, this week, because it's going to come, and you're going to be tempted to do it, I want you to take a minute and step back, and in your mind go, wait a minute. This is not what it looks like. This is not some little thing. This is not me getting a little bit grumpy. This is not just a couple of paper clips. This is really the devil coming up out of water, wanting to find a place in my life where he can live, from which he can attack the rest of my life. And on that basis, I believe that you will have a greater strength to say no to those things, to choose the new life God's placed in you, instead of the old life that he told